Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to let folks filter into the room here. We'll get started in about 30 seconds. Thanks for being here and sit tight. All right, I see the room filling up. The number is still going up, so I'm going to give this just about 10 more seconds for people to get in before I launch the conversation. All right, and with that, I think that we will get rolling. Hello, and welcome to our webinar today. It's the Bright Ideas, a Guide to Careers in the Clean Recovery webinar. My name is Jo Olson. I'm the Communications Manager at Fresh Energy, a clean energy nonprofit in Minnesota working to speed our state's transition to a clean energy economy. And you won't be hearing from me much today, but I'm going to be covering some housekeeping right now. And I'm going to launch a poll so we can figure out who's in the room. So a poll should pop up on your screen. Let us know who you are. It'll help guide some of the questions and conversation points later today. So first of all, some Zoom-related housekeeping. Please use the Q&A function on Zoom. It's like a little button on the bottom. You'll be able to see other people's questions. They can see yours. Please upvote the questions that you like, then they'll just naturally rise to the top. You can use the chat box too, but if you have a question for our presenters today, please use Q&A. That will ensure that we see them. So we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so stay tuned for that. And you can submit your questions at any time. The conversation will be pretty free-flowing today. And I think with that, I am ready to end the polling. I'm going to share the results with everyone. Looks like we've got a lot of mid-career professionals in the room, which is pretty exciting. And I'm wondering about the other. When we were debating the poll, we were trying to figure out what type of people will be here today. So maybe in the chat box at some point, enter in kind of, who you are, what best describes you, and kind of where you are on your journey, I guess. And with that, I think I will turn things over to Ben Passer, who is a speaker and will introduce and get the conversation started.
Great. Well, thank you, Jo, for that great introduction, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. So my name is Ben Passer. I'm the director of Fresh Energy's Energy Access and Equity Program. I'm joined today with author and expert and Fresh Energy board member, Eric Pasi. Eric is the Chief Development Officer at IPS Solar, and he's written a fantastic book titled CleanWave. I've got it here with me. And that is what prompted us to have this webinar here today. So I'm going to turn things over to Eric, and he'll tell us a bit about himself and his background and what prompted him to write CleanWave. And then after that, we'll have a discussion about some of the main themes that stood out to me when I read his book, and we'll open it up to questions from the audience as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric to share a little bit more about his book.
Thanks so much, Ben. Thank you, Jo, and thank you to Fresh Energy for hosting me today. I am so excited to launch this book called CleanWave, A Guide to Success in the Green Recovery, which came out formally about 3 weeks ago. A little bit before I launch into what the book is about, I think it would be helpful to start at the beginning and tell you a little bit more about me. Ben had given a brief introduction, but I am a first-time author. I am extremely passionate about the climate issue, and I'll get into that here in a minute. And I'm also the Chief Development Officer of IPS, Impact Power Solutions, a solar development and construction company based in Roseville, doing solar projects across the country. This is a photo of me staring intently toward the future of energy. And I do consider myself an energy futurist, and I'm extremely passionate about bringing those solutions to the fore over the last dozen plus years of my career. I started with IPS back in 2007. I was a fresh graduate from the University of Minnesota, Carlson School of Management. Like a lot of students, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and that was an understatement. I think I had a brief stint as a semi-professional musician. I was considering going into aerospace engineering, but then saw that those classes started at 8 a.m. and decided to go into something more palatable, business. And it's pretty silly to think back on your teenage sleeping habits as an indicator for what you want to do in your career. But nonetheless, in 2006, I was, like many folks, very struck by the science behind climate and An Inconvenient Truth, which is a documentary that had come out that year. And so I started to do some investigation into, what can I do that really speaks to me if I wake up in the morning, that I'm excited about, I'm passionate about, and wanting to do some good in the world. A lot of my contemporaries at that time went into, kind of cushy jobs with Fortune 500s like Target, Cargill, and other kind of local companies. And I really wanted to stretch myself. I found that clean energy and solar specifically was on a 40% year-over-year growth curve at that time. And it was exciting. It spoke to me. I'm kind of a closet nerd. And so the science, the math, technology, everything boiled together really spoke to me that this is the place that I want to launch a career. And so I sent out my resume to a couple dozen clean energy companies, and IPS was the only one to call me back. I started off in sales. I hated the idea of sales. It still is a little weird for me to think about it, but my perceptions really changed when I found that sales really means helping people and solving problems. And so this is a photo of me earlier on in my career, where I also did installation work. IPS was a small company at that time, so I was able to see multiple sides of the business. Everything from installing equipment to meeting with homeowners and business owners to talk about solutions that could help them reduce costs and clean up their environmental footprint. This project was at a farm, actually in Chisago County, for cheese. They manufacture cheese and also harvest and host bison on their property. So 40 kilowatt array. And really, I dive into this story a little bit in the book, where, Ed, who's the farmer there, wanted to install solar to offset some of his electricity costs at his cheese and bison ranch, but then also was interested years later when we reapproached him about doing a community solar array on his property. Next slide, please. And flash forward several years, and you can kind of see the solar array in the very, very far corner, the 40 kilowatt array, and this is a 5 megawatt array. And so really talking about I've been at the advent of the scale of solar in Minnesota and the country. One of my favorite statistics, 98% of all solar that's been installed in the country has been done since 2010. And we're on an exponential growth curve, and that's what has me really excited about solar in the 2020s and clean energy in general. Next slide, please. A little bit more about my passion and my background. Photo there in the center is a photo of my dad, who was an immigrant from Tonga, which is a archipelagic nation in the South Pacific. He immigrated to the U.S. In the late 70s and met my mom in Hawaii, which is where I was born. In 2014, I had the good fortune to visit Tonga, which are what the outside pictures are representing. And his home, where he came from, is in Nuku'alofa, which is a city that's only about 10 feet above sea level. And meeting my family, uncles and aunts that I'd never met before, cousins I'd never met before, seeing the history of his people and my ancestors, really accelerated the urgency for me to do whatever I can to affect positive change related to the climate crisis. Unfortunately, in 2015, my father passed away from heart disease, and which further solidified my really internal drive to do whatever I can to preserve his legacy and the legacy of my ancestors. Next slide, please. Almost to the point where in 2013 and 2014, I went out to Hawaii actually and met with my dad and other people to talk about solar. And I ended up developing a few projects on the Big Island of Hawaii for a few condo associations. And unfortunately, my dad wasn't able to see the results of of our discussions and our work out there, but progress continues, and we'll be building my third developed project out there next year. Next slide. So that brings it home to what really drives me today. Aside from climate justice and are my kids. I got a 1.5-year-old and a 5-year-old. Kate and Lillian, and they're the light of my life, and I think about their future much like many folks who are in the clean energy industry think about their families as a driving force behind their passion. Next slide, please. So that boils into CleanWave, which I've been toiling over the last couple of years, actually since Lillian was born. And the book, which Ben showed, is a guide, past, present, and future of clean tech with actionable advice for career seekers. And I go through not only anecdotes from my own story, but also interviews with luminaries in the field, and it's been rewritten a few times. I was set to release it this spring, and then we ran into a global pandemic, to which I felt definitely needed to comment on and opine on the impacts and the reasons behind the pandemic. And then was set to release again in the summer when we unfortunately witnessed the murder of George Floyd and the rising racial justice movement. And so it's succinct. The book, I rewrote it to really address how do we move forward in a recovery effort through the lens of climate justice and environmental justice. While also giving a background on what the industry is and what the industry means. So my 13 years in the field and growing what was I think in 2018, IPS was the fastest growing company in the state, according to Inc. magazine and Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal. Just a lens to what's happened and what's to come. And I'm so excited to share it with everybody, and really happy to have this discussion here today with you, Ben.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that background, Eric, and thank you for being here. I'm really excited to dig in with you. So at this point, I just want to take a bit of time here to dig into, as I mentioned, some of the main themes that really stood out to me in reading your book. And then after that, I think we'll open it up to some audience questions. So folks who are here with us this afternoon, please feel free, as Joe mentioned, to use the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll be compiling questions there. And as time allows, we'll definitely dig into your questions as well. So Eric, just to get us started, I think a note that you just kind of ended on, which really stood out to me as I was reading your book, was how you really, took a step back and reframed CleanWave in the light of, frankly, a really difficult and tragic and trying 2020. And you talk about how disadvantaged communities have the most to gain from a green recovery. Could you talk a little bit more about why you believe that, and could you give some examples of how that might show up?
Absolutely. So research has shown that lower income households disproportionately pay more of their income toward energy costs, and to the tune of about 50% for low income households out of their budgets. And so if as we create more efficiencies in their homes, provide cost stability through rooftop solar or other measures, they disproportionately have more to gain compared to wealthier households. And these are also communities that have been frankly, their communities have been exposed by for economic gain by corporations and polluters. And so we've seen decades and decades of exploitation, and that's resulted in certain areas where asthma rates are many times higher than in more affluent neighborhoods. And so to the extent that we aren't using fossil fuels in these frontline communities, to the extent we're investing in green and electrified transportation in these neighborhoods, will have an outsized impact compared to providing the same opportunities in other neighborhoods. And it's a way, I think a lot of us have reflected back on, especially communities of color and Black communities, and the the exploitation and the issues that have affected them, and how can we start to mend those wounds and address those issues. And clean energy, at least from my perspective, is certainly one way to start down that road.
I think that's really, really well said, Eric, and I appreciate you bringing those perspectives. I mean, I think in addition to the communities that you talk about here at home, I think just to kind of tie it to your heritage and your family story, I mean, we're seeing right now in Central America the recurring effects of climate change and the worsening of hurricanes hitting that area, and those are countries that have historically been exploited or are under resourced. And so I think the imperative of really ensuring that we're working to benefit under resourced communities and communities of color is true, not just here at home, but really around the globe. And so I just appreciate you raising that perspective and really making that part and parcel of your book and the perspectives that you bring. I think to touch on the statistic that you raised in your presentation about how quickly development has happened in such a short period of time. Could you speak a little bit more about just trends that you're seeing in American energy markets along those lines, and just where you see energy markets heading in the years to come?
Absolutely, and this is through the lens, my own lens, right? And I may be slightly biased, but we have turned a page at this point in our history where clean energy is not only the cheapest new energy source, but it's cheaper than operating existing assets, as we've seen in many areas of the country where coal plants are just no longer economical. And there's a justice issue there as well in transitioning some of these entrenched communities that have relied on jobs and prosperity from the fossil fuel industry, and migrating and providing opportunities to them to reposition into a clean energy economy. But it's very evident that that is the direction that we're headed. I think for its part, solar has done actually like an astounding job of driving costs down. And I've seen it firsthand where, from when I started in 2007, the price of, a wholesale price of solar was about $4 a watt. Today it's, around 30 cents per watt. And due in large part to tariffs as to why it's not even lower than that. We've seen in areas like Australia and Europe where people are paying around 20 cents, organization paying around 20 cents for wholesale solar panels. And that's allowed us to, hit goals that that we had set from, earlier in this decade, or I should say toward around 2010, when the Obama administration launched the Sunshot program with the goal of reducing costs for installed solar in the country to $1 per watt. And we are well below that now on the wholesale or on the utility scale side of the equation, where we're probably closer to 70 cents and maybe less. So the cost declines are real. We're starting to see similar cost declines in other areas such as energy storage, which will be kind of the defining factor in the 2020s related to energy, where we're no longer reliant on gas peaker plants. We can replace those and scrap plans for new peaker plants by installing much more versatile, much faster to deploy energy storage systems. And the cost curves, as I mentioned, are very similar to solar. And we've got really the sky's the limit with energy storage. There's so many different chemistries, so many different use cases for it. We're going to see energy storage not only revolutionize the traditional electricity markets, but also transportation, and do so at a much more accelerated time frame than any of us had predicted probably 5 to 10 years ago. And so I do feel nuclear will continue to play a role, existing nuclear, until we have a breakthrough with maybe faster and more safe deployable smaller nuclear facilities. Just the costs right now are really out of step with what we're seeing in solar and wind. But we do and will need baseline outside of solar plus storage and solar plus or wind plus storage as we decarbonize the electricity and transportation sectors. So the trends are real when you're seeing all resource RFPs and RFPs from utility companies. We're consistently breaking new records, not only in the US, but also in places like the Middle East, where we're seeing sub 2 cent per kilowatt hour PPAs being signed, and those are without significant subsidies for those projects. We're seeing a turn, again, not only from utilities, many of whom, including Excel, are now stating goals of 100% clean energy, RPS standards, et cetera, by 2050, but also corporate America and global corporations making similar commitments at an even more accelerated time period. And so it's the confluence of markets and technology that are bringing us to an inflection point, or have brought us past an inflection point, where the clean energy future is imminent.
Thanks, Eric. Those are great insights. And I think you spend at least one chapter really doing a thorough walkthrough of some of the kind of emerging and future trends in clean tech. And I'll just say, as someone who works in energy policy all day, every day, I really appreciated, just you taking the time to dig into where some of those technologies have been, but also where they're going. And, for me, was just a really helpful, informative resource. And, I think, I'll definitely continue to consult this book going forward as kind of a cheat sheet, so to speak. Um, just backing up to solar specifically, and here in Minnesota, Minnesota has a huge community solar market. I think the biggest in the country. So, for someone who works in that market specifically, to what would you attribute its success? And are there any things that policymakers in Minnesota and really to other states looking to Minnesota as a model could leverage to improve on in the future?
Yeah, I talk a bit about community solar in the book, and specifically Minnesota. That's been part of my maturation in business, and I attribute a lot of it to being in the right place at the right time. And we were at a front row seat in 2013 with the passage of the 2013 Solar Jobs Act. And I would be remiss if not to give a lot of credit to the Fresh Energy team. It's a reason that I am enthusiastically, supporting the organization, and I'm so glad to be, part of the board. Is the leadership aspect. And so what had happened, I think, in 2013, after the 2012 elections, we had a Democratic governor, Senate, and House. We were looking to, and by we, I mean kind of the Renewable Energy Coalition, which was, comprised of NGOs such as Fresh Energy, but also a lot of industry groups. We're able to look at other markets like Colorado, for instance, where Xcel had an existing community solar program at that time. And we're in the envious position of saying, okay, well, what if we could just start over? And what are some of the roadblocks? What are some of the issues that are standing in our way of progress? And really what Fresh Energy fought for, the industry fought for, which I didn't appreciate as much at the time, but was to create a market that was uncapped and had the ability that if there was interest in the program, and that there wouldn't be anything to impede the progress and the deployment at scale. So it was really looking to these kind of other earlier community solar markets, taking away things that that made a lot of sense, and then getting lawmakers on board. And I think to Clean Energy's credit, as an industry, we've been very good about talking about some of these ancillary benefits. Not only are we investing in infrastructure, we're also, in the case of community solar, providing savings to communities and residents. We're providing and creating jobs in infrastructure that can't be outsourced. There are so many benefits, and we've been very good about communicating those benefits to policymakers and to the public to garner support. And ultimately, we passed that 2013 Solar Jobs Act. And kind of the rest is history. Now, flash forwarding to today, where Minnesota has more community solar. The rest of the country is catching up quickly, but as of a year or two ago, more community solar than the rest of the country combined. And so now, as IPS is growing and we're looking at other markets and becoming more involved in policy creation, we're able to talk very pointedly about the benefits and the history that we've had in Minnesota, and what those states and markets can take away from Minnesota to create an even better and more robust programs across the country moving forward.
Absolutely. I think those lessons learned are super important, Eric, and I appreciate you kind of walking through how we got to this point as well. And of course, appreciated the plugs for Fresh Energy. So you talk in the book, just to expand on that a little bit, you talk in the book about the importance of grassroots organizing and advocacy organizations, really just working in tandem with or kind of complementary to industry efforts. And I would be curious to dig more into that, just kind of talk a little bit more about the importance of those organizations. And then also, I think you alluded to it a little bit, but just kind of how the evolution of policy and the development of the clean energy market in Minnesota influenced your own career path.
Yeah. Very loaded questions, but I think from my vantage point, at least, the Minnesota and community solar, they've been bedrocks of the what we've seen in terms of progress. Now, I will say that like anybody, or I shouldn't say anybody, but especially in clean energy, we need to pay respect to like the symbiosis, right, that exists between industry and then advocacy and policy. And we're in a somewhat of an interesting position because energy is so heavily regulated. It does require a lot of policy that we need to show broad support for what we do. And in terms of symbiosis too, I mean, we need to be giving back as much as we're receiving in terms of support. And I think that is extremely important and a point that is missed, I think, by some in our industry. And so, talking a little bit back about the 2013 Solar Jobs Act, I mean, I was phone canvassing with Sierra Club in the evenings and on weekends, and I was standing outside at theaters with flyers, and did it really move the needle? I can't say for sure, but it helped me feel like I was doing as much as I could, and I think that the more organizations and the public see that we're living our ethos, we are fighting for what we believe in, that we will continue to see groundswell of support for what we do. And so I hope that answers at least in part your question.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. I think that's great advice and just great insight into the importance of the different roles that the different organizations can play. So I wanted to touch on a specific quote or section in your book that really stuck with me. And you talk about entrepreneurship and what it means to you. And I think if I have it here, you say entrepreneurship means looking for lines. And that really just stuck with me, and I think about it. I think about it quite a bit. Could you share with our audience what you mean by that, and just kind of, I guess, illustrate a few more examples?
Yeah. So entrepreneurship, I mean, it's when we're working with a small business, in a small business like IPS, I mean, we are entrepreneurs to the core. I mean, we had to create our own future. And a lot of that was kind of winging it and, just trying things and failing, often, and, I guess for us a little less often than when we succeed. But when I mentioned looking for lines, it's trying to find a better way to do things. And when, you're, for instance, at Target and you saw a bunch of people, and this is the most literal version of looking for lines, but, folks that are waiting to have their items scanned, people figured out, retail figured out that it's faster to let people just check themselves out, and create the technology and the process for people to do that. I think we're going to see, similar issues or opportunities in the clean energy sector. When whether it's doing all at this point, we've seen because of the pandemic, solar companies moving to 100% online sales and online outreach, and trying to smooth the process from creating interests to all the way to installing the projects on your roof. And that is part of a big push by industry to make the process faster, more streamlined, and less expensive. So I think, those are just maybe a couple of examples of looking for lines, seeing the lines, and then, doing something about it.
That's great. So in CleanWave, and I think you mentioned this in your presentation a little bit earlier as well, you talk about how the first kind of career opportunity you had was in sales, and you said it again today, as you do in your book, but you hated the idea of sales, and I was wondering if you could share more, of that job search story. And then also for our audience, just share any advice that you have for career seekers who might find opportunities that don't completely align with their interests, and kind of where that might be able to take them.
Yeah, so you're right. I did not like the idea of sales. I still am a little bit cringy when it comes to talking about it. But I did find that, again, once, I kind of reframed the thinking around it, I was much more, confident and comfortable with it. I would say that there's definitely going to be instances where there may be, an opportunity that's outside of your comfort zone, whether you're not formally trained in something, but willing to learn, or you're, maybe it's an opportunity that doesn't exist in Minnesota or wherever you live, and that may require you to relocate. Which may be easier now if you're able to work remote. But I think it's really about showcasing and living that passion, right? So if you have a passion for something and you have a passion for clean energy, that's like 90% of the battle. Like when we are hiring, we are looking for people that live those ethos and align culturally, and culture is a huge, hot button topic now for organizations, and but building those types of commitments and ethos and that passion is something that you as an employer cannot teach. And so I would not shy away, in instances where it might not be 100%, fit, but being, passionate, networking your way in, not taking no for an answer, to some degree of decency, is how I think, people are able to find employment and gainful employment and success, even if you don't have. I had zero sales experience, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life, and just living outside that comfort zone is where I think a lot of people find personal growth and development. So that's what I'd say about that.
Definitely. I think that's great advice. And in just, I think, a minute or two, we'll shift gears to taking questions from the audience. So looks like there's a few already filling in, but if you haven't had a chance to pop in with your question yet, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box in Zoom. Before we shift to those Q&A questions, Eric, I wanted to ask you, if everyone listening to this webinar today walks away and does one thing based on our discussion, what would it be? What would you recommend?
Get involved, and whatever that means to you, and that's maybe unselfishly, besides going to cleanwavebook.com and checking out the content. I think that the more people are invested, not necessarily monetarily, but just from your own personal standpoint, the more that you're invested in what you believe in and the cause, and if clean energy is that for you, then the faster we're all going to get to a point where we're living in the future that we want. And I think nothing is more evident than to that point than what we've seen in the last election cycle related to climate. I mean, there wasn't one question on climate in the previous presidential debate, and it was front and center multiple times in the two debates. And when we saw exit polling from voters in 2020, it was one of the top 2 to 3 issues that voters were resonating with and concerned about. And so I think that shows how things have just catapulted, and in large part due to grassroots movements from folks like the Sunrise movement, from 100% campaigns, to all sorts of environmental NGOs and other people who've worked hard to elevate the issue. And I think as people again are thinking about what can I do, it's getting involved and continuing to push the narrative and push our elected officials to do something related to climate and related to clean energy.
Get involved. I think that's a great takeaway. Thank you, Eric. So now I think we'll shift over to questions from the audience. And the first question is from Catherine. And I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Eric, around just the importance of creating opportunities for historically under-resourced, underserved communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, but also thinking about what this transition means for all communities, including those who have historically been economically dependent on fossil fuels. And so the question that Catherine asked is how communities can find funding for training in the clean energy industry for both BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and folks who currently work in fossil fuel industries.
Yeah, there are actually quite a bit of there are quite a few resources out there for communities. So whether if it's at the public level, pushing officials to adopt standards like a Green Step Cities program in Minnesota, or from the utility standpoint, there are a lot of free resources available at the homeowner, business owner level to review what things that you can do and implement to help reduce your energy costs and environmental footprints. So I think it really depends. There are also for somewhat larger issues, if it's a planning grant, there are groups like the Clean Energy Resource Teams, which is funded and kind of spearheaded, I guess, by the University of Minnesota. And then also grants that are available via foundations like the McKnight Foundation, who fund ideas that maybe institutional investment or other grant opportunities that aren't doing. And so a lot of them have like different and varied timing in terms of when they're accepting applications. And so there's, I have some of those resources listed on my website and in the resources section. But there are a lot of resources out there, and people, there are some areas where where those resources are accumulated in one spot, so you can kind of check them out. But I'd encourage you to maybe follow up with me afterwards, and I can give you some heads up on where those might be.
I think that's great. CleanWaveBook.com, follow up with Eric. I'll just, mention from a policy perspective, just, kind of looking to examples from other states. I think Illinois is one of the, clear examples of really, combining clean energy investments, job training programs, and really direct investments in under-resourced communities and communities of color. So, I think that if this is of interest, just kind of scanning around the country for other policy examples, I think Illinois is at least one great example here in the Midwest to kind of look to start. But I think that's great, Eric, and I'm sure many additional resources on your website as well. Next question in the Q&A is really kind of focused around getting started in this industry. So this question asks, being a recent college graduate, an emerging professional, but not necessarily having formal training in the clean energy sector, would this individual have to go back to school? Would you recommend going back to school to get started in the industry, or is there another opportunity to really gain experience on the job and grow in the industry that way?
Yeah, so I love this question. So I think there are a couple of ways to go about it. When somebody is transitioning kind of newish into the industry, what I would suggest is either going lateral to the same type of position that you're currently in, but in a role that's at a clean energy company, or so that's the easiest way, I think. And then, what you don't want to do really is try to transition and move into a totally different job title. So you'd want to kind of move into something that you're comfortable with and then move up or beyond from there. But for instance, if you wanted to get into like a financial role, you're in marketing currently, I would try to go back to school or to try to train in a different vertical to get some of that experience first before hopping over into the clean energy market. But I don't believe that you'd need to necessarily go back to school. And I think, as I asked that from a student recently about, should I just go straight into grad school? I think a lot of people have different opinions about that. But I think in terms of the clean energy industry, I mean, people are rewarded for experience and for passion and commitment more so than a resume. And so it's just getting into those earlier opportunities, kind of first and getting experience. There are also some accelerator programs that are really interesting around the country, and the resources page on cleanwavebook.com has some of that information listed there. But where you kind of get into a cohort of like-minded individuals, and for a 3-month term, you're really like an accelerated learning opportunity, and from there, job placement in clean energy is extremely high because people are looking for those people that have the talent and the drive to succeed in the industry. So I would say those would be a couple of points to take away.
That's great, Eric. And just as a follow-up, I think you touch on this in the book, but one question in the Q&A specifically is around tech jobs, and just asking for a little bit more information and perhaps examples of tech jobs that are available or emerging in the clean energy economy.
Yes, so software is a big piece to what we do. So anything from programming the trackers that work, usually in the US, where we've got single axis trackers that are tracking the sun, and that it gets complex when we're talking about different terrain and grade and making sure that the modules don't shade each other at certain times. So there's software and engineering that goes into that space, as well as similarly in battery technology, when we're trying to match the output in terms of voltage to match the load of different facilities. And that all has to happen in microseconds and really at scale. So there's a technology component or tech component to that. And then when you're moving into like actual engineering, tech engineering, there are similar things that if you're a car technician person working on technology that goes into automotive. Obviously, there's you can translate that into electric vehicle automotive, but then there's also kind of similar things related to electric drive trains and other things that are part the other sectors within clean energy. So there's definitely, tech is embedded in what we do. And again, whether it's, creating more streamlined manufacturing processes or the software side to some of the things that I mentioned, it's really driven by tech.
Great, and I would imagine there's a whole host of support and assistance and related jobs that are needed with those jobs as well. Thanks, Eric. So the next question is from Deb, and she asks a question around youth and really exposing youth to some career options in the clean energy field. She says that the Youth Eco Solutions program is planning how to work with middle and high school students and exposing them to green careers. And I know this is, I think, kind of a common theme in your book, but what recommendations can you offer for younger people, middle and high school students, and how might those folks or that program use your book in a way that can really encourage students to look into those career opportunities?
First of all, I love the YES program. I think it's fantastic. I was able to present to YES, I think probably like 4 years ago or maybe 5 years ago now. And I'm a huge proponent of providing really STEM learning opportunities for students. One of my favorite, the things that I look back on my career, I've done a lot of work with schools and, developed curriculum for students and teachers related to how to interpret the data that are coming off of kind of these real-time and historic production numbers created by solar arrays that are on the roofs of schools. And so really, it's a passion of mine. I think can do and should do, and what districts should do is continue to teach the science behind climate and provide opportunities for students to learn about what are some of these tech and what are some of the solutions that are going to exist to combat climate and paint and frame things in such a way that it is a positive, really, and it is the largest wealth creation opportunity of our lifetimes, and for students to understand there's a lot more to clean energy than just solar panel or wind turbine, and really talking about the breadth and of opportunities that are out there, whether that's in more sustainable agriculture or again transportation. There's just a lot of routes that students with different varied passions and backgrounds can find within clean energy, and it doesn't just have to be kind of a monolithic thing. So I would suggest there, and YES does a great job. I mean, you don't need my advice on how to engage students. There's by everything that they do related to creating kind of capstone projects for students to really get their hands involved in doing activities and doing projects. I mean, that's the way to really drive the messaging home is when kids can get engaged. One of actually the best things that I've seen in the last couple of years was we had a nonprofit come to Minnesota. We Share Solar, where students are able to put for certain districts, they provide kits. The students put the kits together. There's a QA quality control component where they review these solar suitcases, and then they send them to places like they did this year into Sudan, into refugee camp. They install these solar suitcases where students can then learn at night, because they're either burning kerosene lamps and those are toxic and or expensive to run. They get installed, and then at the end of the semester, they get a video from the kids that are impacted by these solar suitcases, and it's just such a great and unique program. And it's things like that where kids are like, wow, like this is you can change lives. And that's, I think another example of really like having these more impactful experiences with clean energy that can move the needle.
I think those are great perspectives, Eric. So I wanted to ask one more question from the Q&A, and then I have one more in my queue to ask you. So I'll just note now, if we're not able to get to your question, and you did share in the Q&A or in the chat, please feel free to follow up with Eric or me after the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. But there's one question that I wanted to touch on in the Q&A. I love this question from Matthew Jones, and he asks, he's a recent grad, he says, looking to ride the CleanWave into a clean energy career. And he asks both of us, Eric, to really compare and contrast what it's like to work in an NGO like Fresh Energy versus working more in a kind of squarely industry player like IPS. So I'll turn it to you, maybe just to kind of, from your perspective, share a little bit more about, the comparing and contrasting between working for IPS versus working at an organization like Fresh Energy.
Yeah, I would think so. IPS, we're very active in multiple markets, multiple areas, and it's a very fast-moving, fast-paced organization. And I wouldn't say that that's necessarily different, but it's different in different ways, in which like we're trying to affect policy and make decisions that allow the business to grow in multiple markets across the country. And that may be in slight contrast to being hyper focused on kind of one area of policy or specific market. So I would see that could be a differentiator. And yeah, and that's probably the main one. I realize we're running out of time, so maybe I'll flip it over to you, Ben.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that's great insight. I mean, of course, Fresh Energy and organizations like us are, policy and regulatory work first, but we are, there's significant overlap in the fact that we are really trying to transform the market. We're in the business of market transformation. And so, I guess what I would say in response to that question is, there are some, of course, some obvious differences in our work, but there's a significant amount of overlap too. And so, I've just been grateful for the opportunity to work with you over the years, Eric, and some of our partners in the industry space, really working cooperatively to help, shape and drive policy at the legislature and elsewhere. So, I think that's maybe a little bit more of a a softball than we were originally being asked, but I think there's a significant amount of overlap, and definitely when you work in this field, you're definitely going to make partners from various parts of the industry. So I think just to wrap up with our questions here, I wanted to ask you, Eric. We promised our audience a little bit of an outlook into kind of where things go from here. We are now in mid-November, so wanted to ask what opportunities you're seeing within the solar market now that the 2020 election has passed and given the results of the election.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to take away, and I'll just start at the federal level first. I think we're going to see with likely divided government. We don't know what's going to happen in Georgia in January, but it's likely if there is divided government, I know that at the very outset, there will be a lot of executive orders and executive actions that the Biden administration will take, whether it's returning the Paris Accord, reinstating CAFE standards. But probably the most impactful will be at FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where we're likely to see very sweeping measures to allow for more onboarding of renewables and renewables projects, hopefully accelerating the queue and the timelines for deployment for those projects at a larger utility scale level. And really what the energy landscape is kind of defaulted to at this point is that there's a lot of these kind of state level policies and market level policies and utility level policies that are in place that are kind of outside the jurisdiction necessarily of the federal government. So you look at a lot of states in Minnesota, Nothing really changed from the makeup. We're still going to have divided government in Minnesota as well. So there's going to be a lot of compromising. I think we're going to look to, much like at the federal level, infrastructure packages that will allow for an investment in clean energy solutions. You will see that likely in other areas where we have Democratic governors, like in Washington and Illinois. And other markets, and so it will be very interesting to see how these state level policies begin to mature here over the next 6 months or so, and what the kind of the horse trading looks like to achieve some policy goals. But I do feel like even just the executive actions that are likely to be taken at the federal level will have a big an outsized impact. Kind of moving into mid 2021.
Definitely, I agree, Eric, and it should be interesting to see what happens from here. So I know we're just about a minute over time, so I think we'll move into kind of our wrap up here. But I wanted to thank you for the discussion, Eric, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I know that we promised we'd pick a random attendee to win a copy of Eric's book, CleanWave, but there are a few quick things that I wanted to mention before we do that. First, the Energy Access and Equity team here at Fresh Energy is seeking a new policy associate. It's a policy associate with our team, and you can learn more information about the position and apply online at the URL that's shown on your screen there. So that position is still open, and we're seeking applicants through the rest of this week. And second, this Thursday is Give to the Max Day. Fresh Energy is your clean energy champion, working to drive state policy and regulatory work toward a 100% clean electricity system, with nearly half of our electricity coming from renewables like wind and solar by 2025. It's very exciting work, as you heard here this afternoon. And we're also striving to ensure that Minnesota builds out a clean energy economy with more accessible, family-supporting clean energy jobs. So we ask that you support Fresh Energy by giving today. You can text to give at the number on your screen or visit our page at GiveMN. And Joe will also drop these details into the chat box. On the next slide, you can see the copy of CleanWave, and we just wanted to again thank Eric for his generosity in offering anyone who registered for this webinar by 5 p.m. on Monday being entered into a drawing to win a free copy. So we are excited to announce that the winner of CleanWave is Anna Martinez. And Anna, we will follow up with you after the webinar today to make sure you get your copy. So with that, I just wanted to again thank everyone for being here. Thank you to our guest, Eric Pasi. And a recording of this webinar will be posted on our website and on our podcast later this week. So please stay tuned. And with that, I just wanted to thank you all again and have a great rest of your day.